Hello, welcome to Reality Building with me, Uluscri. So, universes are a very big thing, and there's a lot of ways that you can go about it, so I want to start with my normal caveat. You can do this in any way you so please. You can discard all of this that I say in this video. This is just how I do it. So that out of the way. First is concept. I think about whether I already have an idea. And if I do already have an idea, then hooray! Typically, whenever I'm making a universe, it is because I had an existing idea that I want to start building upon. But if I'm ever in the position where I don't have an initial idea, or what I have feels incomplete, then I go into the idea foraging stage, which I do have a video about. It's the idea foraging one. Unsurprisingly. The TLDW for that is I go out into the world, I look at things, I look at nature, at science, at art, at beauty. For instance, it's really snowy outside right now. It's really cold, and so maybe I want to make some sort of snow-based setting, maybe even with like ice magic or cold magic or whatever that looks like. And then all of a sudden I am developing this idea for like a whole universe with ice magic that is essential to the physics of it, and you can really quickly get into a spiral with these sorts of things. But more on that later. I see what might be relevant to the idea that I want to make or the universe that I want to make, and I jot it down into my idea bank. Here's my idea bank. This is what it looks like. Or I just simply look at the idea bank and I see what I already have existent within there. But once I already have the idea, then I have to figure out the scope. Whenever I'm thinking about creating a new universe, I have to think about how much of the universe to make. And this is highly dependent on the stories that are going to be told there, or at the very least the art. Are there going to be universe-spanning stories or galactic stories or, just interstellar? Or is it going to be much smaller? This becomes really relevant later, but it's pretty important in the beginning. You'll see in the next slide that there are a good number of things that I like to consider anyways, no matter what the scope is, just because it's really important to the functioning of reality itself. And another thing that's very relevant to that is how similar is it to our universe? The answer to this question could determine how complex this process is right out the gate. I do tend to at least base the physics of the universe on our universe because that's just a lot easier. It's what we know. That is all to say this point. And since I was already sort of talking about it, part 2, forces, which is going to involve physics. What are the basic rules of this reality? What are we looking at? And they're really relevant to what we're looking at. What is space like? There are a plethora of options here. There's how many dimensions is it? You could have a flat world. You could have a 1D world. That could be really interesting. And, of course you have your 3D worlds. That's us, that's ours. 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, whatever. You start getting into realms of it being difficult to even visualize, but that could still be a really interesting exercise for world building. Non-Euclidean, as in like the curvature of space? Does space have more or less curvature than our universe? Less being hyperbolic and more being spherical, I think. It might be the other way around, but I think it's that way. What is it made out of? What is space made out of? What is just the reality made out of? Like what kinds of matter? What kinds of space-time? What's the fabric of things? Are there like vibrating strings at the core of everything? As a good number of physicists theorize, is there something else? Is there like a single superparticle or the essence of love? I don't know. It could be. Is there dark energy? Is there a Higgs boson that makes mass happen? Is there something else that makes mass happen? You could get very weird with just this part. There's so many options, way more than the space one, since space is basically just how many dimensions and then what does the curvature look like. This is literally anything you can think of for it to be made out of. And then once you have stuff and the space that stuff is in, how does that stuff interact? And this is where you get into the fundamental forces. A lot of fundamental laws of physics are wrapped up in this one question, since forces are how matter interacts and thus moves and accelerates and whatever. I suppose this point could have been up in the space one, since this is definitely a space-related thing. I mean, it's theorized that the expanding of our universe, at least, is because of dark energy, which, could be caused by some sort of force. But this next one is very important. Is there a speed limit to the universe? Is there a speed of light? If you're working with a relativistic model, then you could be looking at some very interesting phenomenon if you reduce the speed of light hugely, or if you vastly increase it. You could make space feel a lot smaller if the speed of light is a lot larger. Because, fun fact, the speed of light is actually really slow on cosmic timescales. There's a reason why there's a measurement called a light year, the distance it takes light to travel in an entire year, and the nearest star is like 4 of those years. So imagine all of the farther stars and how much farther they are. If you keep all of the fundamental forces the same as our universe, but you only change the speed limit, then you could have a much closer knit universe. You could have a universe where other star systems are able to communicate with each other extremely quickly, and travel could be a whole lot more possible. This is all if I'm dealing with a very our universe-like universe, and especially if I'm determining that this reality is basically just the one that we're currently living in, then all of these questions are immediately answered. And I mean, even in the case of a universe with a lot of bombastic magic systems and whatnot, as long as the underlying physics is basically the same, I can still hand wave a lot of these questions. But if I'm dealing with a situation that doesn't have any of the same physics, then we're talking about weird. Does it all exist purely in an abstract plane? Is it all just like vibes, emotions, symbols, allegories? Is there a fundamental break with the laws of logic in this reality? Like, that could be really mind-bending. Is it just an infinite field of gray nothing with a couple oases? Sort of like that one scene in SpongeBob. You know the one. That one. Are there like time loops and impossible chronologies? You're getting into some very strange and fun territory here that is necessarily going to be harder to navigate just because it's so much different from what your brain is used to, but it's also a very fun, even just like a philosophical thought experiment. I feel like a lot of world building is just really fun philosophical thought experiments. I don't know if anyone agrees with me on that point, but that makes sense to me. Anyways, magic, second 0.5. And this is a 0.5 because magic is basically just physics. At least a lot of like the hard magic systems that you see a lot, where they have like very well-defined rules and it acts like physics. It's like fireballs and the spells are really regular and stuff like that. Once you get into more vibes-based magic systems that are dependent more on emotions and moral actions, then that's what I would consider like a non-physics based magic system. Both are really interesting, and I should make a video about my theories on magic systems. But for this slide, I'm going to be focusing on the more physics-based stuff. So the most important question, is there even magic? Is it distinguishable from mainline physics in any meaningful way? You can have a magic system that's basically just extremely advanced harnessing of the electromagnetic force. It's still entirely based on our own physics. It's just utilized in a way that we do not have access to right now, and so it feels like magic. If it is meaningfully different Then there's a step second 0.5, which is determining all of the separate magical rules, determining the physics of this magic, which is very similar to the previous slide. Does magic affect space? How does it affect matter? How does it affect itself? How does it affect other magic systems? Are there magic bosons, magic force-carrying particles? You can go a lot of different directions with this. And then, of course, are there magical beings, like a pantheon, whatever you want to call it, whatever your cultures call this thing. And if there are, did they have any sort of hand in creating the universe? This is going to be very important whenever you're developing, like, the history of things. World building is a chaotic system. Your starting points will vastly affect everything later on. A still very important question, but notably distinct question, is did they have a hand in changing the universe after its creation? You can create a universe and then lose your ability to change it or back away from changing it at all. Was the universe created from natural processes and then these beings came into form and then they started changing things? Also, on the chaos point, anytime you have any sort of life, such as a being, the chaos meter is just going to be ramped up. Life is extremely chaotic. That's one of the wonders of it. You don't know what's going to happen, even if you might be able to reasonably predict what a living thing could do in the next moment. You don't know which of those things it is actually going to do. For instance, a bird. You don't know if that bird is going to start singing or suddenly fly away or peck the ground. But moving on, did the beings have any sort of hand in making the setting that the world building will be focused on? And that's going to be very relevant later whenever you get to that stage. Once you move on from the actual universe building, speaking of universe building, the next important part is cosmology. The actual structure of things on a very grand scale. You have history. How did it begin? Was it a magical event? Was it more of a Big Bang type thing? There are several different theories about how our universe could have started other than a Big Bang, or just the origins of a Big Bang universe. There's a lot of different theories there. And going from there, how did atoms coalesce? How did they form stars in the first galaxies and planets? Honestly, every single one of those questions that I just said are extremely fascinating, and I highly recommend looking up scholarly articles, scientific papers written on those subjects, because as you read stuff like that, you break down a lot of your preconceptions about how things started. And taking notes on that sort of stuff for, an idea bank for world building, for instance, is very rewarding, and I use that sort of stuff a lot. But yeah, so what does the modern universe look like after all of this development? What do the major, galactic superstructure filaments look like? You look at a map of our current universe, and it just kind of looks like a big sponge. It looks like the inside of a sponge. So you could go that route, massive superclusters separated by super voids. You could have some flavor of Great Attractor, which, if you haven't heard of this, it seems to be a thing maybe outside of our universe that is attracting a whole lot of galaxies towards it, which is wild if true. But on a more fundamental level, are there even galaxies or stars or planets? What does this stuff look like? Is it something strange? Are you looking at galactic superclusters that curiously look like faces? Is there some sort of weird magical explanation for that? What is the story there? What is the history there? And a lot of these points are fairly vague. There's just so many directions you can take. There's so many possible universes, guys. I can't list them all. I can't build them all. And so what I do is just start from the very broad, the very basic, and then sort of tunnel down into the nitty-gritty of things, which is relevant to the next slide. The setting itself, going to wherever this piece of art or story or just the focus of the world building, wherever it is. In general, whatever the main setting is, I go up a level or two and then develop those things. For instance, if I'm dealing with just a single nation, then I will develop the planet and the solar system, but I'm not going to worry about like the nearby star systems or the galaxy as a whole. And if that becomes relevant later on, then I'll just sort of wing it. Like if the constellations become important or just the general state of the night sky, I'll just develop those things on the fly, but I won't worry about them at the very beginning. But I will worry about the solar system and the planet at the very beginning, since those are a lot more relevant. And then I go down to the nation and everything in it, all of the much more relevant stuff. If it's like our universe, then I will be thinking about primarily, what's the star like? What's the planet like? Is the planet a moon? That can have a lot of big consequences. Does the planet have a moon? How many moons? Stuff that is going to be very visible in the night sky. Are there any astronomical events? Impact? How common are those sorts of things? If I'm developing a world that frequently has asteroid impacts, then that is going to be hugely relevant to the cultures and potentially the story. What are all the other planets doing? What are comets doing? If comets are really common, the night sky might look a lot different than ours. And on the planets thing, a very fun thing to world build is fictional astrology systems. How do people tie significance to the planets that are in the night sky? Those little wandering stars up there that are going in really weird motions. In contrast, if it is not like our universe, are there any magical cosmic phenomena happening? How does that affect how the planet is composed and what its moons are like? Whatever. Just have fun with it. Be weird, be wild. On the topic of being weird and being wild, here are just like some other considerations / miscellany. Just because there are so many ways that this could be taken, I figured that I would just give a little flurry of fun things to consider. Constellations, I was talking about planets earlier, but you could expand this to full constellations. A star map is very easy to make, honestly. You just put a bunch of dots on a piece of paper, and then whatever patterns come out is sort of how your constellations are going to pop out. That's what happened in our reality. The stars didn't intentionally put themselves into these fun shapes and these fun connect the dots images. And important to note here is that you do not have to do full galaxy building to make constellations. Constellations are only going to be made up of the most local stars and or the brightest stars in like 100 light year radius. I don't actually know if there's any stars beyond 100 light years that can be seen from Earth. There probably are. If there are, then editing Uluscri will add a note here. Wow, that's very cool and interesting. Anyways, moving into the weirder stuff for our universe. Black holes and quasars? You could have a planet orbiting a black hole. You could have a planet orbiting a twin black hole system, or a quasar. Well, a quasar is just a black hole that is emitting a huge amount of radiation. Don't get near one. And also, don't be in the, radiation jet stream. Harkening back to the celestial phenomenon that could be very disruptive, like asteroids. Supernovae events don't even have to happen in the local solar system to be hugely disruptive. So you can have a similar situation going on with quasars. And even if you're not, if you have black holes running around, you're going to have a lot of weird time dilation and space curvature stuff going on. Anyways, pulsars in neutron stars. If you're not hugely versed on astronomical things, I'm not going to go into a huge detail on a lot of these, but as always, Wikipedia is a great place to start. Do not end on Wikipedia. Go to scholarly articles and books written on these topics. But if you just want a beginner understanding on a lot of these things that I'm listing here, Wikipedia is awesome and great. But yeah, you could have a planet orbiting either one of these things. Imagine nebulae being in the night sky. There's a lot of nebulae that can be seen on a very non-light polluted night, and they are very beautiful. I personally have not seen any in the night sky because RIP the night sky in the places I've lived. but just imagine if there was a nebula that was taking up half of the night sky. Lone planets are ones that are not connected to any, like, stellar system. They're not orbiting anything. They might be orbiting, like, the center of the galaxy, but they're not tied to a star. Those things get pretty darn cold. And this could be really interesting if, like, life started when the planet was still orbiting a star and then it got ejected, and now you're looking at some very interesting evolutionary paths, or, civilizational paths, having to rely on, like, geothermal sources, geochemical sources. Here's a weird one. Higgs field energy state drops. That might just be a bunch of word soup to you, but this is a theorized and very terrifying thing where the Higgs field, which is what causes mass to happen, all the mass of all the matter in the universe, changes its energy state. It's theorized that this Higgs field is not in the lowest energy state it could possibly be in. And if that happens anywhere in the universe, it could cause a speed of light wave that propagates through the universe and causes atoms to break down, basically annihilating everything. So that's fun. And then just rapid fire here. Strange matter, quark stars, mirror matter, etc. The exotic matter page on Wikipedia is full of really weird and interesting stuff that you could include. Weird and interesting stuff, by the way, that is either currently existent within our universe or theorized to exist here. Reality is weird, and you don't even have to leave conventional physics to reach things that are basically just magic. So imagine what could happen if you actually include some magic. And then just as like a little bite at the end, life that thrives in space and dies in gravity wells and atmospheres. Life that doesn't have to depend on air resistance or dealing with gravity at all or friction. How does it move around? How does it get energy? How does it get matter to build and repair itself and reproduce? Maybe this kind of life lives in interstellar dust clouds. So that's just a little fun idea for you. But we get into the final notes. These are broad level things that I like to keep in mind as I'm going through this process, or stuff that I like to keep in mind as I go on to future steps. For instance, I like to think about how cultures view their universe, view their reality, either through the celestial sphere. How do they conceptualize their cosmology? A lot of real historical, like ancient cosmologies are really fascinating to read and really weird, by the way. And now on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you can have an initial theme rather than an initial idea. This is if you're really focusing on the storytelling aspect of this universe. For instance, if you're building a universe specifically because you have a really interesting story that you want to tell, but you just don't have the world for it yet. This is something that I'm trying to experiment with. Having a theme that I really want to communicate and then building the world based around that theme. I think about The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, where the physics itself and the discussion of the physics especially is a part of the themes of the story. I mean, the main character is a physicist, and one of the main plot beats of the story is that he's really advancing a certain field of physics. But yeah, this is a very good thing to keep in mind, but it definitely isn't necessary. You can have a blast in the world building section and not worry about whatever stories you want to tell, and then make your stories later and still make really poignant themes. And of course, to echo a previous point, be creative, be weird, have fun. World building is an exercise of play, of art, so be playful and be artful. Lastly, part 2, my patrons on Patreon. I would like to share my extreme thanks to Abaletian, Donny the Pony, Unproductiveness, Nick Rosario, Runner Girl Fran, Vert Dirt Runner, Kadragi, and Inthrillius. Thank you all so much. If you want to support me, the lowest tier on Patreon is $2 a month. I also have some world building templates that you can get if you're interested. But yeah, ending slide. You can find me on my website, my itch.io, my Substack, my Discord. I'm at a lot of places. Okay, have a lovely day and goodbye.